Hi, today we've got Rob Akershoek with us, who is actually a luminary in the IT4IT service management area. He's consulted for a large number of companies, big and small, like Vodafone, Siemens, and a couple of others. He started off his career being in his own. He was his own boss for a while, and then he started now yeah, he's had a good stint with Rabobank, wherein he was doing a lot of great work on service management. And last couple of years, he's been the chair for IT4IT as part of the Open Group, where he spearheads a lot of groundbreaking changes in creating new operating models, new service model initiatives, and so on. So currently, he's with Fruition Partners as a managing IT management consultant. So he brings a lot of rich experience in the IT management, service management consulting area, especially, and he is contributed heavily to the service management, CM, DevOps, and IT4IT arenas. So we will hear from him how his journey has been to start off with, and then we'll dwell into how you can actually carve out new operating models where disruption is a norm, and Corona has made life difficult for a lot of companies to make their operating margins, and it's become very difficult to meet your bottom lines. So great having you here, Rob. I think it's a nice bright day out there in the Netherlands. How's it? How's the weather there?
Yeah. Hi, good day, Karen. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very nice here. It's sunny. It's not
Oh,
that
okay.
warm, but it's a really nice blue sky. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So please walk us through your journey on how it's been. I think you studied in the University of Netherlands, 20 or something, and then you went to a lot of other things in your
Yeah.
career. Yeah. So please do a quick walk through your rich journey that you have taken.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I started at University of Twente. I studied information and business technology combined. So it's about information technology and business. So it's a really good combination. And during my study, I started my own company advising local small businesses on how to apply IT and business together. It's really my first experience with my own business.
Okay.
And then I started working for Capgemini as a developer. So I really started as developing. I wanted to know, what's it about building new systems for customers. And after a while, I moved into the IT management space, like ITIL, IT service management. But I started initially with monitoring and how do you integrate event management at that point. And then I started to say, well, we can do it much better because there's a lot of discussion about how to improve IT management. So I started my own company with some other colleagues. And well, that been acquired by other organizations. And still I'm working for that organization that acquired my original company. And I'm typically engaged at larger IT organizations, like at Shell a long time, helping them to build an operating model architecture to manage IT. Like it's about the processes, the tools, the data, all the integrations. And so really about how do you transform your IT organization, looking not just at the process, the tools and people, but also the data. So the data as the fuel of your IT organization. But more about that later in this conversation, I guess.
Oh, okay, okay. So, why did you switch to, would have been fun being your own boss very early on. You started in the IT, business IT. Typically, people get to that space when they spend 15, 20 years, but it's quite surprising that the very first thing that you started off with connecting business and IT together. Because once a person has become an enterprise architect or that kind of stuff, they start worrying about those problems. What was your motivation to solve that problem very early on?
You mean by why this business IT combined
Yes,
business?
yes.
Yeah.
You
Well,
could have tried solving a lot of other problems. So why that
oh,
particular
true.
problem
Yeah, yeah.
fascinated you?
It started actually when I was as a student, when I had a specific class on IT and business combining together, and I thought, why not try it in practice? So what I did is, with some other students, we just went to local, smaller business, medium-sized organizations, and we say, let's look at your business process and see how well it's supported by IT. And we come with recommendations. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to implement the solution for you. And we used at that point, it was for the fourth generation language tools like FoxPro. It's not that technology special, but it was more like, how can we, across this entire business chain, improve? And nowadays, we call this value streams, of course. At that point, it was just a business process. And you could see, if you go to a factory, it was typically a small company with the marketing, sales, production, and then you could easily see improvements. If you just go through the processes, nowadays we call that go see, right? And like look at how things are actually happening, and the Gamba walk, basically. Look at how a business process is end-to-end enabled, and you see, you can easily spot improvements and help them in the transitioning. And currently I do the same thing, right? I still look at how is my end-to-end, in this case, IT process enabled by the right set of tools, the people, the data, and how do I improve it? Because, and that's what's funny, if you look at it, most organizations have a very complex IT management landscape. Or just as a picture like this, right? It's like, IT management is pretty complex, and most organizations now realize that IT management is a critical capability. If you know how to manage your IT, nowadays we can call it digital management, right? You are able to enable your business much better than ever before. So, but this is typically not very well organized in most larger IT organizations, right? There's fragmented processes, tools, data, and there's typically not an integrated vision how everything's should be connected. And that's typically, this is my mission, right? To go through an IT organization, see, look, how is your end-to-end journey from a new demand? How do you get something developed, tested, deployed in production, and continuously improve? It's like this picture shows you the end-to-end traceability. And if there's one thing I learned from all those initiatives I've done with many organizations, there was one key ingredient that most of the time was lacking, and it's really about data-driven IT. Understand how data, and basically it's about traceability, but also understand what services do I deliver, how is the business enabled by IT, how demands, testing. So basically the picture on the back, how is everything connected? If you can solve this puzzle by creating transparency and traceability in your own IT organization, that's the only way to become successful. And you've seen organizations that have been successful have this, but they don't realize it themselves. It's really kind of a hidden secret of being successful in any.
Yeah, I think I did chance, sorry to interrupt you, I did chance in one of your interviews said secret sauce is traceability and transparency. Actually, true, very true. But you were doing way back in the day when there was perhaps you didn't have fallback on ITIL or no CM practices. So you just started off with applying your own mindset to solving the problem.
Yeah, I started in the telco business actually, in the large telcos, and they had a model ETOM. It's like there is a kind of business model for running IT. So they have a kind of a reference model for IT. So I learned the practices.
They actually interface with TOGAF a bit. ETOM actually interfaces.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. So I was using that, and then I started as an architect. So TOGAF as a background materials, ITIL. So I used ITIL, TOGAF, and that ETOM model like business for the telco. And that was actually very well structured from a business layer, service layer, and let's say the system layer. And that was a kind of principles I started to work on. And then I was engaged with a larger organization like Shell, where I become an IT management architect. So looking at the IT, initially more on the tooling, to be honest, what are the tools we need to manage IT? And during an inventory, we saw there were over 300 different tools used for managing IT. That was 10 years ago.
That's a lot more than what you showed in the screen.
Yeah. It's background. Like any tool you could think of, right? True. So we started to build a sort of overall blueprint. How should IT look like? What are the capabilities I need? End-to-end process, and then plot the right tools to it, but also the data and the people and the process. So to build really an integrated model, because that's where a lot of organizations are struggling, right? They have this is kind of background. They have a lot of practices, capabilities in place to manage IT, but it's very difficult to see, what's on my backlog, because teams have their own backlogs. We have incident problems. We also have the backlog of the teams. There's portfolio, there's a lot of things out there. So I started to build a kind of reference model together with colleagues at Shell, and that's where IT4IT came about, together with at that point HP, Micro Focus now, with different companies to bind together. Can we build a kind of reference model of how IT in a digital environment should work together? Like, how do you connect the dots, let's say, end to end? Yeah.
Correct. I think I was talking to Charles Betts the other day. He also is a co-author of some parts in the IT4IT. So he works in that work stream.
Charles,
Yeah, so he was mentioning that in one of his books that he said there's no footwear for the cobblers' children. So that's how orphaned IT was. We're making big shops run, like telecom and healthcare and oil and gas,
Correct.
petrochemical. But to take care of IT's own interests, there is no reference architecture, as you said, and it
Yeah.
is so siloed that the value chain is not integrated. Everything is in bits and pieces. You raise the
Correct.
ticketing in one place, you do the operational parts in the other one, you do bug fixes in another one, and you want to see the end-to-end visibility of what's happening where you don't have the perspective of that. So
Correct.
this is definitely a great initiative, because I struggled initially IT4IT. I was like wondering why the word IT4IT. Like, what are your thoughts on why the word was coined IT4IT? Because I'm sure you'll
Uh,
have the perspective of that, having been involved with the standard for a long time.
Yeah, so let me explain where the name came from. IT4IT came from a department within Shell was called IT4IT. It was a department, a business.
Okay.
So, and this unit within Shell was focusing on what are the tools, the practices I need to run a digital environment, right? And they moved to cloud, multi-vendor sourcing model. And IT4IT, what are IT management capabilities do you need to manage IT? Like your build logs, testing, monitoring, security, service management, the CMDB, all IT. I need to run IT. And now you maybe should call it what digital do I need to manage my digital? But it's really about what kind of IT management capabilities do I need to manage IT through its entire service lifecycle. So the name came from a name from a portfolio, IT4IT.
Oh,
And in the past, Charles was calling that ERP for IT, right? Which was
yeah, no,
also
blog also, website also by the same name. Correct.
but the essence, I think, is still that we need to think as everything you need to run a digital factory is pretty complex, right? It's about the planning tools like portfolio management, demand, enterprise architecture, development, test, monitoring, security. It's very big. And you need to think about this needs to be more integrated. And that's why all the capabilities together is the IT for IT. And what do I need to run an efficient digital environment? And think about it as a portfolio, assign architects to that, and then try to understand how do you improve, because it's basically an end-to-end value stream you need to improve, like managing the portfolios or continue to deliver new services or resolve issues before the business is impacted. So there are a number of value streams you need to optimize in IT, and that's where IT for IT is about. Understanding the capabilities, the tools, yeah, and the processes, and of course the data and the
True, true.
integrations.
I think data, I think when you brought out the nice point that data is the CMDB, or the data is really the integral part of the whole big problem. So what do you think?
Absolutely.
Actually, I'm sure your operating model concept is involving a lot around redesigning the CMDB itself, and coming up with so the IT4IT forum actually on the, at least in the part two or the level two of it, coming up with a structured data model or a data schema for solving that problem, because I think that's what fundamentally you must have started at the initial part of your career using Fox Pro and trying to fix those parts, and we
Indeed, yeah,
still
fix
have
it.
the same big problem in a large number of companies. We are
Yeah.
firefighting day and night. Yeah.
And it's nice that you asked, because the data is really at the foundation for everything you do. It's foundation of let's say the capabilities you need. And this on picture on the back, you see the kind of data you need. But to say it's not about the CMDB, it's much more, right? It's about the product backbone, indeed, like the config data, like what products and services do I have that enable my business. Now, the funny thing is, if you ask an organization, what are all the products or services you deliver, call it applications, they don't know, right? There's not a good portfolio management there. So that's part of that. Then understand what releases you have, where it's running, so the whole backbone.
Yeah,
What's
I mean,
also data,
sorry, Rob. Actually, when you
yeah,
said CMDB, what I meant was CMDB for the entire enterprise, not only
yeah,
the
yeah,
services part of it. But as you said,
yeah, yeah,
who's signing what
yeah,
kind of contracts, who's what kind of products and
exactly,
services you've got, what kind of
yeah,
containers you have in the system, and the whole
exactly,
gamut of the entire stuff.
yeah,
Correct. There is
yeah.
no such thing right now in most companies.
No, indeed. I agree, and that's the challenge, right? And maybe we should not plot it to traditional CMDB tools, but it's all the data, indeed, as you mentioned, but also
Correct.
the data, for example, about what are the backlogs, what's on the backlog, or test cases, or security risk, or threat. So it's in IT, and the picture on the back highlights a bit. It's we talk about maybe 100 different entities to manage IT, and as you mentioned, there's contracts. There is maybe incident changes, backlog items, test cases, services, value stream. There's a lot of data. And typically what's lacking is how do you connect all that data together? Because, and it is really challenging. Think about teams working on the backlogs. There's a lot of different stories, epics, there's changes, there's instant request. And typically what we lack is where do we manage this IT and how do we standardize that a bit? And maybe standardization is not, it's not the goal to standardize, it's more, can we leverage the data more in IT, data-driven IT? Because we now want to use this data to take better decisions. And it's not an insight in cost, but also value. It's like data analytics on your IT environment. And you see it at the business side. Business has IT, and they use data much better to take better decisions. And for the IT management space, we need to do the same, leverage the data to take better decisions. And the data, it's very broad, but the core is not that difficult, of course. What are the services I deliver or products to my customer? Who's using them? What does it cost? What are the risks? And what value does it bring? Right? And if you can make that kind of link, your build is successful. Yeah.
But
and
are
maybe
we, sorry, are we is the IT4IT Forum, are they working on bringing up with a data model which would connect all of these entities like an E&R? Initially, you just figure out these are the entities at a broad level. I'm sure that is there in the IT4IT standard already, that the high-level data entities are parked. And is there an effort to take it down and say, okay, when you sign a contract, these are the things. When you write a user story, you go all the way from epics and features and user stories and tasks. This is how it is, and then finally track it to a bug ID, and then pull it all the way down to saying this is a requirement, this is a feature, this is the stuff.
Absolutely.
So is work happening in that direction actually?
Yes, indeed. And it's good that you mentioned that. It's exactly as you mentioned, to get, how is that maybe it's a demand or portfolio backlog item moved into a product, a backlog, an epic feature stories into a development testing. It's maybe defect going into production. As you can see in the back end here, it moves into, there's an event detected, it means an incident, maybe back to a defect to the development team. And the IT4IT Forum is working on how do I create all these key data entities, how do I connect them together and define the key capabilities to do that. Yeah. And then you can use that as a sort of reference model to look at your own situation. Where am I in this digital journey? Where are my gaps? And it's also a diagnostic tool for your own IT organization. Yeah.
But how do you integrate that data model with the myriad set of tools that are there in the market? Like you showed a screen which has had all of the list of possible tools that you can go from BMC Remedy to ServiceNow and all of those things. So how are you going to integrate this and make these vendors compatible with that data model? Because that's a huge challenge in itself. Because everybody's so happy building their own roads, building their own pipelines, and their own infrastructure. So unless of course they have the skin in the game, they'll not be likely to adopt to this standard. So what is an effort that's being made to get the vendors enticed into this standard?
Yeah, now there are two ways. Right? One is vendors can participate in the IT4IT forum, like Micro Focus, ServiceNow are part of that, and other vendors as well. And they can plot, like BMC has plot their model to the IT4IT reference model. So there are different vendors already looking at how do we can plot our data models to this model. Now, what you see also, there's more and more common terminology appearing in the market. And IT4IT is trying to also promote that terminology, like, okay, for item, for instant problem change, now we have backlog items with storage features and tasks associated with portfolio backlog. So there's a lot of common, and for security, we talk now about vulnerabilities and security events. So more and more this terminology starting to standardize in the market, at least how we, like from Open Group IT4IT, but also in ITIL, Scaled Agile Framework and Scrum, they add. So the idea is to create this common terminology framework, as you could say, and then, but it's more also taking the terminology in the market that's already like almost like the de facto terminology, and then link them together. So that means that people started to use this as a model, and then the vendors are invited to basically map their tools to this model. But the reality is, of course, every tool vendor has its own data model. So, and that's not a problem by itself, as long as we can are clearly how we use those constructs. So the funny thing is, but it's really funny, if you look at the leading vendors in the agile market, like a Jira, Atlassian, Microsoft, and maybe GitLab and GitHub, they all use the concept of a project still, right? They don't have, so it's a project, that's the centerpiece, and then you can link your stories to it. But actually what a project entity means, it could be an application, it could be a maybe a collection of applications, could be a whole department. And that's where you need to think about how do I structure these entities that I can use for traceability. So IT4IT says now you have value streams capabilities and you can link your products to it, but make sure you implement the tools with those constructs. So you can use it then to implement all the different tool vendors with the right way so that you have traceability end to end. Yeah.
Okay. So,
But it's still challenging, right? Yeah.
true. I think the nomenclature that a lot of companies use, as you said, is project, but now it is moving to the product-based setup. That's another challenge.
Yes.
People
Yeah.
are moving towards product-centric way of developing things. That's one challenge. The other one is value streams by themselves, as you said, can span, like there could be some value stream which starts off in the hospitality region and ends in the telecom space. There could be another value chain which could start off in home rentals and
Yes.
perhaps go to payment card and banking as the end value chain thing. So because it's going to connect these myriad different industries and value stream stages, so I think that also throws a lot of challenge because a lot of things are not in your control. There's a lot of legacy to it and people have used it across. So I think although I think what you started is a great initiative to do that, what are your challenges that you see in your consulting career, integrating these diverse conflicting as they appear,
Yeah.
because vendors are hard to change and like they're saying this is the way we do it and this is our interface,
Yeah.
take it or leave it. And
Yeah.
of course if you want to do us the other way, it's going to take us some man years of effort, and then only then we are ready in the way you're going to talk about that. So how is
Correct.
that, how do you address that
Uh,
challenge?
Yeah, so I think that the challenge typically is in many organizations that they're doing a lot of things in parallel already. And so you see here on the back end, right, we're moving into like DevOps, Agile, continuous delivery, we're moving to brokering, self-service. So a lot of things happening at the same time in any organization.
True.
And so most organizations, they say, I'm already working on it. So if I say, well, have you thought about this end-to-end digital delivery? How do you optimize that? They say, oh, we're working on it. We're using Agile, with DevOps, we're going to do the skilled Agile framework. And, we're working on it. And then I have asked them, but actually, do you have this end-to-end, think about data end-to-end, and how do you plot your processes and tools together? They don't have an architecture. So then the first problem I find is, who is accountable to design this end-to-end way of working? Because if you think about it, it's pretty complex flows of work, right? We have demands coming in, or I need to go here, demands coming in, moves to development, testing, deployment. It's a complex end-to-end process. And we need to take an engineering and architecture perspective on this to say, how is this blueprint going to work? But then you need to ask, who is within the IT organization leading this end-to-end design work? There is enterprise architecture, but not often for the IT management function. And you cannot do it by yourself. So typically you have different owners for these areas. Like for ops, you typically people like the service management people, they, we are responsible for service management. On the other side, they're typically the business units that they maintain their own kind of portfolio backlogs. But now you need to think about, let's co-create this all together with the different teams. These kind of ways of working, and starting with a capability model, looking at the value streams for IT, different value streams, like there's a new demand coming in, how do I select that, translate it into value, because most organizations don't have an end-to-end picture for that yet. So that's where my biggest problems start. Who is accountable to design it? Because the CIO and the CXO they think that, but we covered that already. We have people. We have security, looking at security discipline. We have the business units do their own thing on the development side. We have ops responsible for the ops part. But still, there's not often the right set of accountability to design this kind of a digital delivery framework. And so we need to appoint someone, say the architect and a kind of chief product owner to own this very complex environment. So that's where it starts. And then, what I start with most organizations say, this picture basically, if you don't change the way you run IT as you do today, then you won't be able to do what's on the picture near. So because what we see in any organization is IT is becoming more and more important to manage or to realize business value. But we also got more let's say, vendors in our ecosystem to manage. We got more services. There's more changes. There are more security events. We got more controls. So the things we need to do is becoming more and more, right? Think about cloud, APIs, more vendors, more security dependent issues. So we need to structurally change the way we are going to handle that. Otherwise, we won't be successful. And that often triggers organizations to think about, okay, let's think about the bigger picture, think big, but act small. And that's where I think is a good start, right? Think about this, like this picture, kind of how do I deliver IT end to end? How do I do that today? And that's where my journey starts when I was a student, right? Just look at how do you do this today and how is that enabled? And then you could see, there's a lot of gaps and issues there. Like I find maybe that I have 5 different backlog tools. We got Jira, Azure DevOps, and every team does it in their own way. Even use the same tool, but they implement it differently. And let's look, and that's where you need to start. Look at how it's done today, and then starting to create a common, basic common terminology in IT organization. So about backlogs, incident changes, config.
Correct. So how do you nail the, as you said, whose responsibility is that bigger question? So in your experience, is the CIO been able to drive that, or is the architecture team take responsibility for it? Again, that's an orphaned area because not many takers for it, because people know there is a bigger problem out there and it's large and looming all over our heads, and it's more aggravated with CI/CD practices. There are even before the rate of change is so fast that the bugs are also being escalated. You say 12,000 builds a day, Netflix does it, so the probability of bugs are also so big. So how does one keep track of this? Like, how do you convince? So do you have a org chart which says, okay, this is how we need to run this IT4IT practice? Yes. I'm sure you will have some ideas on that.
Yeah, let me explain. So as you mentioned, it is like in a digital body of knowledge, right? You've seen the DP book. There's a kind of layered approach. So you have things that teams, so it's basically, if you simplify it a bit, 3 layers. We have the team layer or the product layer with individual product teams. Then we have like a portfolio, maybe it's a value stream layer, like a team of team structure. And then you have the enterprise. And what you need to do is to think about, okay, what do the teams can decide themselves, like on the team level, and they have maybe their own way, how do they manage the source code, they have their own, they could do test-driven development, they have a lot of freedom there to fill in that space. But there are also things you need to arrange on the team of teams level, like how do we share backlogs together if there's because typically a product team doesn't enable a complete customer journey. A customer journey is dependent on many different products. So we need to organize something on the team of teams. And on the enterprise level as well, like managing compliance, the risk and the cost and where to invest in. And that's where you need to think about those 3 layers and think about, okay, what do we need to facilitate the teams to do better, faster and cheaper? Because that's where we want to enable the teams, right? Like the sooner, better, cheaper, safer.
Rob, sorry to interrupt you. I just had a query. Let us say that you're already at the the enterprise level. You're playing the game at the enterprise level, which is where the service management issues are kind of escalated. So let us say you're at that level, because everything down below probably could be an overwhelming case for an integrated service management, because probably will say we have bits and pieces of problem, let us solve it. But when you've grown to a multi-million-dollar enterprise at the enterprise level, so what are your challenges, and how do you convince the leadership that we need a set of players who will actually think and worry about these things and actually solve them? Because but the rest of it, we quite understandable that the challenges are not too many. But when you go to that level, what has been your experience on how difficult or easy it's to convince the top management?
Yeah, now it is challenging to convince them, by the way, because one of the things they say, we're working on it, right? Because they are.
First of all, do they have a budget for it, or it is most often they say, I don't even see what you're talking about. Indeed. That.
You're right. They don't have a budget for this, and that's one of the biggest challenges. So what they do is typically the following: they have a transformation budget. Let's say they are moving into Agile and DevOps and cloud. So with that, they have some initiatives, and they have initiatives running on the security space for security, for example, the SIEM. So they have all those budgets split. So they have a lot of split budget. And so what I try to convince them is say, you're spending so much on improving this end-to-end value chain, but it's very fragmented. You got millions of investment in security, compliance, you got your test management, DevOps pipelines. There's a lot. And you have to migrate to your service management system, implementing self-service, cloud management, chargeback and costing, contract, software asset management. So, and typically there is a lot of investment done at this moment in a fragmented way. So that's the first thing I'm going to show them and say, look what you're already doing. There's a lot going on, but they don't really align very well. You only improve components instead of improving the end-to-end value chain. So what you should do is, instead of investing in capabilities separately, try to improve a value stream, like requirement to deploy, for example, end to end. So this includes test management, but also deployment. And we say, let's start with what are the IT journeys you want to optimize for the DevOps teams, like onboarding a new DevOps team. Can we do it faster, better? Because currently, typically, there's a challenge, right? Or onboarding a new service to the cloud. And instead of saying we optimize test management there or security there, we say, let's improve a number of journeys, put the funding there. And then you do the same at the business side. In the business nowadays, the products are not just funded. There's a value stream funding, like hire to retire or order to cash. So you need to think about that layered approach. We say, let's rethink how we improve. So instead of saying we have security, improving their own security management capability, we say, no, security should be embedded in this end-to-end. So it needs part of the CI/CD pipeline, adding security controls there. So really create a kind of bigger initiative, but in a scaled agile way, right? So you say, these are the strategic themes. We want to deliver faster and we want to make costs more transparent. Okay, what do we need to do? And bring then the budget there to achieve that. And it's still challenging but the way I start, typically I take IT4IT as a starting point and I say, okay, look at how you run IT today. It's and you know, there's a lot of improvement. How can we assess where you are today and at least start with creating a sort of blueprint where all the different teams are on the same page where they need to move to, and then start small with improvement initiatives.
So your tiny Excel icons are the siloed databases, effectively.
Yeah.
So,
typically many. So, for example, one of the questions I asked the CIOs, and how many applications do you now have as a SaaS? Just an example. Do you know how many applications are running in the cloud? Or how many applications do you currently develop in cloud native? Because apparently you've said we move to the cloud, but how many applications are that? And they have no clue. So I say, well, that's actually your problem. You don't have traceability, transparency, because why don't you know how many SaaS applications you have? It's very fundamental to be able to, and I'm not saying it because just get an application portfolio management in place, but more like it's a symptom of there's something not traceable. We deploy new services, but we don't even know where it's running. And this is happening in any major technology transformation, right? In the past, when we moved to physical to virtual machines, people said, oh, it will be all different now. And after a while, we got many different virtual machines who have no clue what application is running on it. Because every time the IT organization is thinking, now it's different, we need to do it differently. The same for the cloud. We move to the cloud. It will be all different. And after a while, they find out, there's a lot of cloud resources not used. We don't know, the tagging is not up to date. We don't have insight in cost. We don't even insight in the risk. So, and this is where, and of course, it's not about data. It's about how can we make it more effective and efficient to manage this and make it more traceable. And that's where IT4IT can help, but also just logical thinking, right? How can I connect the data together to take better decisions? And
I think,
and also let the teams collaborate. Yeah.
Do you also kind of have this challenge that when you expose the previous diagram, like there's chaos in the way you are currently running? In that diagram, this particular diagram, the cruel reality. So when you do this, there could be a lot of value chains that the customer would say that, I want to connect these pieces first and the rest of them later. So have you encountered those kind of challenges? Because like you don't have to do a complete end-to-end IT4IT implementation. Probably they'll say, okay, I want to do my Jira with my backlog ticketing and my product backlog and perhaps a few features. And of course, the incidents and the problems that are coming. I just want to touch that part. And as you said, it could be order to cash, it could be hire to retire, or concept to delivery, or all of those. You pick up one of the value streams and then do it. Like how do you think the sequencing happens? Because the other part is a big bang approach, but companies would be perhaps more interested in solving one value stream problem first and then looking at the others.
Yeah. No, but this is a good question because it's challenging, right? Because everything what's on the picture you already have in place in one form, maybe even Excel, right? But typically you have it already. But it's not very optimized for this new way of working. So indeed, you need to start And some organizations start with the value stream like detect to correct. They say, let's start with the monitoring, try to predict things and have like sort of detect, monitor and remediate, because we focus on resilience now and observability. So that's a good, but then it's still too big. So maybe we say we start with some critical infrastructure layers, like maybe we move to the cloud. We're going to solve detect to correct for our new cloud services or for our VMware stack. Everything's running off VMware. So that's where a lot of organizations start. Another area where some organizations starting is the request to fulfill. Oh, here. And request to fulfill is about, let's standardize a catalog so that people can request services, automated provisioning. And just because there's so many different catalogs, so many different ports to request, let's fix that. So that are two options that you can start. Another option is, which I also is probably good, is to layer a structured foundation. So like the whole end-to-end chain. And so what is typically done is start with a good backbone. And what does the backbone looks like is having a good portfolio backlog. So it's on the portfolio backlog, a good product team backlog, like in Jira, Azure DevOps, and then a good service management backlog in, let's say, in ServiceNow. And then connect those together. But with a structured data, like say, we start with the product definitions and services. But then you cannot do that for all. So what you do is you implement that with a small business unit or a part of the business unit, let's say a specific value stream for the business, let's HR or another, and you onboard the teams in this new way of working with a small set of teams, but demonstrate a whole new way of working end to end from a portfolio demand into the, like the whole skilled agile approach. But also, and when you deploy something, that's automatically monitoring is activated, and then we can automatically update the CMDB. So you take a number of principles, you say, this is what we want to achieve. So we want to build, deploy, we want to CMDB updated and monitoring in place. That's what we're going to have. And we implement it for a small set of teams to make this work. And then we demonstrate how it works. And then we're going to onboard other teams, because we need to convince teams that this is creating value. And that's where you need to start small. But think about an end-to-end value stream, like in this case, the IT value streams end-to-end. And that's a good start for your journey. Yeah.
Okay. So
and you can do that sometimes with new services. Like if you move to the cloud, let's start with the cloud journey first. Onboarding. So you say everything we onboard to the cloud, how are we going to enable that end-to-end and facilitate that? Yeah.
And there is no single vendor actually who solves this entire value chain as far as it stands today. HP has told that we are limited in our offerings and we just want to do that. We don't want to do what others are doing. And I'm sure ServiceNow also has its own limitations. BMC has its own limitations. So how do you, when you do your consulting, how do you pick and choose which tool stack to actually project in the potential portfolio of the client's landscape?
Yeah. Now, typically, in the backdrop, you can see it, right? The end-to-end, call it the DevOps tool chain for now. Of course, it's not about tools. It's really about the process, people, and the data as well, right? But okay, let's talk about tools now, right? But it needs to be an integrated tool chain. So it typically starts with identifying what are the most fundamental, let's call it the core, the foundation. And that's typically where work is managed in IT. Work is managed from a portfolio, it's the backlogs and operations, instant problem change and request. And look at how does the work currently is managed in IT. Can we define a number of key components there that is the foundation? And typically the foundation is founded by having a good service management platform, having a good agile backlog and even portfolio backlog there, and including request management, by the way. And then say, okay, how do we, and sometimes that is like a platform of ServiceNow, or you just say, no, for service management, we have vendor A on the backlog. It's typically like you take market conform tools, right? So for the backlog, typically it's Azure DevOps or Jira or GitLab, for example. Those are kind of, so you typically try to take say, what is the market conform tools which you can combine? And but you still want to simplify it, because testing, for example, is a big area. You have many different test tools. So you can start small and say, okay, let's a minimum, we need some code quality scans, some security testing, and some, let's say, automated functional testing. And later on, we add other things. But you're right to say there's no single vendor that can do it all, right? We need deployment, monitoring. So it's really, but you have a current estate, and you at least it's good to think about what does my target state look like. And also good to mention is that if you move, let's say, to Amazon and Azure, those vendors come with their own tools also. So you need to integrate those components as well, like for Azure deployment or monitoring with AWS CloudWatch. Yeah, so they come with, and that's not a problem because you want to leverage those tools as well, but you need to integrate it in your backbone. And
because some of the tools are definitely on-prem and some of them are in the cloud, so the game gets pushed into the cloud, and that becomes a bigger problem to do it. So I think then still the bigger question remains as to who's going to connect these dots. So that's a challenge.
You're right, and it's who's connecting the dots nowadays. What is there? There is a new technology domain appearing, right? It's it's in the middle, the value stream management. You see in the middle, value stream management, and that's a new tool category that is really about connecting the dots.
Oh,
so those it's a
Cloud-based. Yeah, I've heard about
Cloud-based. It's digital IA. It's also ServiceNow in this space.
TaskTop. Okay, TaskTop is Mike Kirsten's company. Correct.
Correct. So these are the companies that try to connect the dots, right? To look at how do I integrate all these capabilities. But it's not saying that you need those capabilities per se. But these are typically vendors that that say, I'm going to look in this space of integrating all the different IT management tools, exchanging the data. And try to fix some of those challenges of interoperability. And this challenge is much bigger than we just see here, because within our own organization, we are challenged by integrating, right? Development, testing, deployment, monitoring, security. But think about, we work with more and more vendors in our ecosystems. Those vendors come with their own tools. So we also need to integrate with our vendors. Again, that's where we need to standardize some of these integrations. And the Open Group with IT4IT is also having the ambition to standardize these kind of data exchanges. We're not so far at this moment, but we need to do that, right? Simplify and these combinations. And to be fair, a lot of these integrations are already implemented, right? Or I must say available. Like you can integrate Jenkins to your source code repos. There's a lot of in place and test management. The problem is they are defined, but you still have to implement and configure them using your own ways of working, and that's where the data model again comes in. If that is essential, because otherwise it's still like a technical integration. Yeah.
True. I think so. How effective has are these tools actually? This cloud-based, because as you said, it's probably very early right now. But how much of the value, because they're very limited to only that transition which is there between requirements to deploy and request to fulfill.
Yeah, indeed.
Is it only indicative there, or does it go across the strategy to portfolio and detect to correct also?
They try to move broader, like that TaskTop, right? They're broader. They look also at work items and maybe even instance on the right. So they try to connect more and more. But in the market, I think it's a little bit early in the market. For example, some of the platform vendors like ServiceNow, they already can integrate easily with Jira, and you don't need an integration layer again below it, right? So you need to think about, do I need a integration layer across my tools, or can tools talk to each other via APIs with REST APIs? But I think you see that with orchestration tools nowadays, right? So you want to deploy to the cloud with an application. Now, there are many different deployment tools you use, so maybe you need the orchestrator across that to deploy. But it's not always needed, because some of the cloud platform, Amazon and Azure, have their own orchestration as well. So it's not always needed. And I think this is where, so that's why you need to start working on, let's say, your own blueprint. Think about, what is my blueprint going to look like? Think about the core products I need. And then you might say, okay, there and there, I need these kind of value stream management components. Because there's a lot of overlap in the market for these value stream, like the orchestration tools, like the CI/CD kind of pipeline, CD pipeline orchestration, and release our orchestration tools. A lot of overlap, but it depends where. So, like Cloudbeats come from that space, right? The whole release orchestration, and they add traceability there. And some organizations try to achieve this end-to-end traceability by creating an IT data lake. Like a data lake where you can store data. Like if I do development and testing, it's test logs, build logs, monitoring data, and then use the data analytics platform to get the data reconciled and reported upon, right? Which is not the same as process integration, by the way, but at least you get your data traceability potentially through a data lake. So there are different options how to achieve this. Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course the whole thing has to standardize because there could be some performance issues based on this. Like, where do you maintain another database to get this all
Yeah,
going? How do you monitor it on the
exactly.
side so that you don't really impact the real system?
Right, and there you touched upon a thing that we have in the industry. Integration between applications always been an issue, not just in IT management tools, also in the business.
Correct, correct,
That's why you have to select tools that are open. So there are a lot of traditional tools out there, but
correct,
if
correct.
you really want this to work, you might say this whole platform is going to be a SaaS, no, I'm sorry, a cloud-enabled platform as a whole, and be open. So if you want to migrate current tools to the cloud, you typically need to look at open APIs, REST APIs. It's easy to collaborate and data exchange. And so there's where you need to select. You have still traditional service management platforms and traditional project management systems that are actually very close. They're all database structures, you know them, right? It's like you
True,
look at
true,
the database, oh, this is about 15 years ago or 20 years ago developed,
true, true.
and not very open. And so we need to think about more modernizing those tools that we see now in the market, starting to modernize themselves as well, of course. But yeah.
Okay. So, among the vendors, who do you think? I mean, probably I might be forcing you to be prejudiced here because I'm just forcing something through you. Like, which vendor do you think is more IT for IT compliant? You could choose not to answer it also, but who do you think is kind of having at least some leverage in that space? Who kind of covers the problems that we talked about?
Yeah, I think the current leading vendors also participating in IT4IT, that's the ServiceNow, that
Okay. Okay.
is doing a lot in the IT, and Micro Focus, the two
Okay.
vendors that are heavily looking into this. And they have
What
with
about
different
HP's own offerings? What about HP's own offerings? HP also has a lot of service management capabilities. So what
Yeah, but
about,
nowadays the HP was co-founder of the IT4IT Forum, right?
yeah,
And so
Micro
heavily,
Focus? I think, yeah, probably
but
Micro
but
Focus.
now most of the tools that HP had are now Micro Focus tools, like for
Okay,
monitoring and so on.
correct.
And HP Enterprise still have some management tools more for the converged infrastructure layer, like HP OneView and but they are more component-based management tools. Yeah.
True, true, true. So where do you think the IT4 IT level two of the
Yeah.
body of knowledge is going to go? I'm sure it has a lot of work to do in terms of integrating the CMDB across the enterprise and probably coming with a reference data model that'll be a good value add. So, what do you think is the charter for the IT4 activity?
Yeah.
In like, because we already have the version one of the body of knowledge, how are we going to go to the next version of it? Like, what is the roadmap typically?
Yeah, so currently there's being work prepared for 3.0.
Oh,
It's
three
like
dot. Okay, okay, okay.
3.0, yeah, that's new. It will be released beginning of next year.
I think
And the
the
key
previous version was 2.1 or 2.0 or
2.1,
2. 2.1.
yeah,
Okay, okay,
2.1, indeed. Yeah,
okay,
you're right.
okay.
And so what's key changes there is alignment further with the DevOps community, like skilled agile kind of ways of working. So aligning, so it's basically enabling DevOps, continuous delivery, and IT and ITIL together. Um, and indeed, in the level two, what you expect is more also support for the, as you mentioned, let's say what we now call the product backbone. It was initially called the service model backbone, the product backbone. So understand the products and services delivered to the customers, the value it delivers, and where it's deployed and configured. That will be a key component to standardize more and more on lower levels. And IT4IT is will also adding more capability layers or more capability management. So also helping the CIO and the CXOs are also going to more to a higher abstraction level, being at a kind of a framework that the executives can use to transform the IT organization. So we're working on a kind of level zero that can really be used as a diagnostic engine and look where you are today, where you need to go to as a management instrument. And the level two, it should be more about how do we integrate the data and sharing the data, and hopefully the vendors that are shown on this map will then starting to say, oh yeah, that's a key enabler for us to integrate and get better data traceability.
Okay.
Um,
And what are your case studies in terms of having applied this for non-IT? Of course, every company is going to be an IT company sooner or later. But like, have you seen any use cases of this in companies whose focus is not IT, but they use IT as a supporting function? So, what do you think have been your involvement with such industries?
Yeah, so there are organizations that are not really IT, like Tata Steel is an example that leverages IT4IT. And Tata Steel, if you look at it from the outside, it looks like a traditional organization, right? It's really manufacturing and steel. But actually, they are transforming to a digital company. And as I mentioned, the data that they need to take better decisions, the whole supply chain. So actually, that organization, Tata Steel, is using IT4IT now as a reference model to look at how they organize themselves. So, so I think even in traditional businesses, they are moving to digital. If you look at that digital roadmap, right? So and that you might not expect it from the outside, but actually it's a very digital company. And so any digital company can leverage IT4IT.
Yeah,
And also thinking about the OT market, like OT, more the operations technology that manufacturing use. You can use this as a framework as well to manage the OT from a planning side and operations, where there's a lot of like Internet of Things where we need improvements. And so you see in IT4IT in version 3 will be more focused on managing any digital enabled product, not just IT as we know of it, but it could be also like maybe like your self-service cars, like smart cities, those kind of concepts where IT or digital is a key component as part of your product.
So at that point of time, you might have to rename the standard as IT for IoT or something like that.
Yeah, it probably needs to be relabeled digital for what, but you're right. The name, but I think the name is still good in the sense of if you translate IT as digital, what kind of, I need to digitize my IT factory as well, right? So digital for the digital, and maybe the core is you need a digital management capability. How do you manage your digital ecosystem? And a digital management capability is basically IT management, and IT4IT is providing the overall, let's say, framework of all the capabilities you need and data. But then you can combine it still with other practices. And I use typically, now I don't have that picture here, it's typically combined with DevOps, scaled agile frameworks, ITIL, of course, and then you blend it into an integrated operating model because you still leverage those practices as well, Scrum, and might even still traditional project management, PMBOK or something, right? It's still, how do you combine all those worlds together? Yeah.
True. So how do you actually, one more question was, typically I've seen the case studies of Stephanie Ramsey. So I think from Raytheon, I saw one of her presentations. She was talking about how to integrate HR with sales, with marketing, with all the other guys in the company. So within one division itself is a hard challenge to fix things. But if you're hopping across HR and finance and inventory and bookkeeping and sales and marketing, like how is the tool landscape? I think the tool landscape, it's not even evolved to meet up to that case. It's nice to talk about a case study, but what's your experience of seeing a realistic sort of a thing that has actually been done there?
I think it has been done in areas and typically what they call now enterprise service management, right? Like in the HR and IT. So typically the hire to retire value stream, like onboarding a new employee. Onboarding a new employee is typically kind of a use case. People use an example where it's not just HR involved, it's also IT, getting people the right access. And that's where you need to focus on. And I think it's a good example like HR, focus on value streams that deliver value. So onboarding a new employee, what does that take to get this user or this new employee optimal, and with maybe in a few days or maybe in one day, it should have everything needed to do the work, right? You have sometimes that people are collaborating with different companies and they only be engaged for 2 weeks. They need to be in the same time there. They need to have access to SharePoint, email, everything they need to do their job. And that's, I think, still a combination of HR and IT. But you're right, then different tools are in place. It's not just service management, it's suddenly Workday or HR systems to collaborate with. But I think, and facilities the same. So I think it's really about optimizing these value streams, and eventually HR and facilities and finance, they will be integrated as well into these enterprise service management solutions. Yeah, absolutely.
True. Because you on HR, let us say you got Workday or SAP Success Factors, and then on the finance side, you've got SAP accounting, and on something else, you've got PeopleSoft. And then, like, unless these guys expose their interfaces or their APIs,
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
connecting the dots is a huge nightmare actually. So
Yeah, and actually, you make a good point. Is that these areas need to be much more mature than they are now. Like
correct,
onboarding employee needs to be kind of almost an API, right? An API.
true,
Okay, I want an employee added because it's not just HR system. It's also the Active Directories, access management system. It's very important. A lot of work to do there. But the
correct,
same
correct.
is true for license and or contract management. For example, if I want to order licenses somewhere, maybe or purchase, it goes to Ariba. Let's say SAP Ariba, but Ariba needs to be integrated with my service management and my CMDB, let's say, to understand what are the contracts associated with my IT services, like my SaaS applications. It's now so important that we integrate also procurement and contract management and vendor and sourcing into IT. It's not just for IT, but also together with IT. Yeah. And this HR. So that's why in IT4IT, we have in 3.0 also some more focus on the supporting capabilities like managed financials, HR, sourcing and contract management, because those are essential components to get cost and transparency as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think because I think once you do this well, the secret sauce is once you have transparency and as you said, visibility. So it frees up a lot of management time or operational time to do a lot of other creative stuff. So you could innovate and try other new different models to do that. I think
Absolutely. Yeah.
your
Yeah.
your
And
talk around that was very well oriented. Like, that's the real secret sauce which companies are missing. There's no traceability, there's no transparency, so that definitely is the secret sauce for a truly digital vibrant
yeah.
ecosystem. So
And it's not easy to achieve, right? And it's not a goal by itself. But if you are able to do this, and that's why I say you need to design it because it will not happen by itself. Yeah, you don't get traceability by throwing, let's say, 100 different components together and you think, now it works. No, it's really, and that's the challenge. You need to design this, architecture this, engineer it. Like IT management is engineering as well, like any other business engineering. So but you need to do it in iteration because you cannot upfront design it either, right? It's the same with you need to okay, this is the traceability I need, but once you have it, you will be so successful, and therefore it's just that's why maybe it's again you need somebody to think about this end-to-end data model, and same with business. You focus on data there for the IT or the digital environment. You need to do the same. Have somebody drawing this and designing this and working with all the different stakeholders together to optimize this.
true, true, true.
And
I think Altation is solving some of the problems. ServiceNow is doing some of them. There's nobody who is perhaps doing it all across. So I'm sure there would be a spur of some new job titles as a part of this that would definitely come out. I'm sure because
right,
it requires a very good set of skills to integrate this layer because you need to know the enterprise side of things, the development side of things, operational side of it. So if
yeah, it's
implemented
kind
well,
of yeah, you're absolutely right. It's an kind of IT for IT architect you need,
yeah,
an IT for IT
correct, correct.
analyst. But you're right. This is so complex because who can oversee the whole thing, right? From a capability, process, data, and typically, if you talk to, let's say, experienced Scrum masters or experienced developers, once they see this, they say, "Oh, I didn't realize that this is what is really needed end to end." They only saw a part of it, and even the CIO is saying, "Oh, yeah, I was not aware of it." And that's the challenge because they look at it and say, this is way too complex. I say, wait a minute. This is your reality. This is the world you live in. And I can imagine it's complex. But if you don't understand its complexities, you cannot simplify it. So you need to have this bigger picture in place. And you cannot eliminate anything. You cannot say, I don't need to do incident management anymore. You could say it, but maybe it's just a backlog item, but it's still an incident, but now we register it in another system, right? But it's still important to say, understand this end-to-end picture. And that's my message to most CIOs as well. Start with this, creating this end-to-end picture, understand your current way of working, understand the capabilities you need end-to-end, and then you can provide better, faster, sooner, safer, and happier organizations, right? So,
True.
yeah, yeah,
So that's ending on a very good note, actually, Rob. That's really great. So I think, as you said, it's a very good framework to help the decision makers connect to the dots. As you said, there's a lot of organizations, people who are not even thinking about this, expecting it to all magically do its bits and pieces. But when somebody needs to all talk together, there is no unified way to get that done. So I think this is a very good placeholder that is there. And what has been your aha moments when you actually have you consulted with the company? I'm sure you had a lot of experience with the Rabobank thing because you did one
Yeah.
whole presentation in the open group on the Rabobank stuff. But apart, I mean, anything, if anything, any other aha moments that you have actually come across? Probably it's even Rabobank. What is that key learnings that you have seen where it's actually probably, as I said, it's still very early to say it's actually worked completely end to end, but something that has really worked in a context and can be useful for people to emulate. What are such examples that you've seen?
Yeah, well, my own aha moments it was coming from other people that say, "Hey, I didn't realize this." So, the funny thing is that I started on the development side, right, and then I moved into service management, and then I saw a different place. I went at Shell and looked at risk and compliance and security and monitoring. So you walk through all the different functions needed to run IT. And so I've seen a lot of things in different spaces, like for project portfolio management I did, and also, and then so then you're suddenly introduced with what all is needed for IT management. And my aha moment was that I tried to explain that to people, and they said, "I have no clue what you're talking about." That they didn't understand the end-to-end picture. So they were always, even portfolio management people that thought they had the full picture, they didn't see the full picture. And that's an aha moment I had, but now I realize it. When I was a student and I was working with those companies, I thought it's a small organization. They know their end-to-end processes, but they didn't. Every person had their own view on the world, and so everybody has their own perspective of how IT is operating, but nobody had the end-to-end picture. And the aha moment came just later when I tried to say, this is what you need and this is what you run IT, that everybody was looking at it and said, well, but just after a long time, I realized there's no single person in IT that knows this. And that's why IT4IT is challenging, because it assumes, you understand the complexity to deliver IT, then you understand why I need this. But if you don't understand what's needed, because you think it's all already taken care of by maybe security there and operations there and development there, then you think it's already taken care of. And so the aha moment was for me that people didn't understand the gaps, and they didn't understand what's happening really in their own organization end to end. And that's why I say to them, maybe you should take IT4IT as a reference model. Just go see. Again, that's where we started off with. Go see. Just look at how IT is delivered today, and then look at where do I need to get this to. If we move to cloud, DevOps, what do we need, and what do we need to transform? And we have to be careful that people say, yeah, but I'm going to change that, so I don't need to look at the current state anymore. We're going to change everything. But then still you need to think about, okay, are you making the same mistake from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, the same mistake? So we always make the same mistake. And as a result, our IT organization is not maturing. Every time we move to a new technology, we go down in maturity level. We move up a little, so we never mature over time. And that's what we need to improve now, because
I think that kind of resonates with your statement that you made in one of the slides, which said, I'm going to deliver you a very bad IT system and get away with it. So that's what the industries have been doing all this while, delivering bug-ridden software, which has got a lot of operational issues, and get away with it. And then charge a premium to sell their services.
Yeah, no, and that's where your question came back on. There's no funding for this, right? Because we got away with it, and IT is not working bad most of the time, right? It's not that bad that way, but we don't see what's actually needed to run it. So it's like a hidden but there's a lot of improvement possible. And as I mentioned, typically we're not doing it that bad, and that's why people don't see how actually with the right people that are flexible, fixing everything and resolving things and improving things, we make things look like it's all okay. But then we still have a spreadsheet with all the SaaS applications, right? And another spreadsheet that we take from Ariba for all the contracts, and have to try to manually reconcile. And again, maybe that's the end of this picture as well. That's not going to take us far anymore, because we need more components, more vendors. It's repeating myself again. There's more we need to do. So we need to realize now that IT management is critical business capability nowadays to manage your enterprise. And if you don't have this, your digital business will not be successful. And so
Oh,
we need to realize now that this is really something you need to fix. You need to fix your digital backbone, your digital delivery factory. So hopefully
okay.
people realize that. And
So thanks, Rob. Actually, we will probably have another session with you when you actually have come up with the 3.0 of the standard.
oh, great.
And
Yeah.
but apart from that, since this is going to be watched by a lot of budding architects and a lot of technology leaders, what do you think is an advice, life lessons that you would give a younger yourself, which is like 15 years younger to you now, when you're starting your career? What is an advice that you would like to give yourself on how you can grow as well-rounded architect or
Yeah.
a senior technology leader? What would be your piece of advice to people from your own career
Yeah.
lessons? What do you think could be done better?
I think the most important thing that I found out, right, is that you can be successful by always know what's going on in other areas as well. So you may be only responsible for a small part, and often you have to convince other people, right? You say, we should do that. And then people say, no, no, it's not needed because of this. So what I guide people and say, what you need to do is talk with people everywhere in your organization. Because if you have that insight, you have more insight than any of your colleagues. And if you have that insight, and then you really need to do kind of, it's like almost like a CSI kind of investigation. How do people actually manage demands? How do we actually manage costs? How do we allocate cost to services? And try to figure out how this happens. Just nowadays, we don't talk to the coffee machine anymore with the coffee machine, but talk with people, collect that evidence, and you say, wow, this is what's going on. And then you have the munition. Then you have the people that you can convince, because then you have insight that nobody else has. So really need to talk to a lot of people, research that, and combined, you have so much more information than anybody else in your organization.
True. I
And
think network a lot and that kind of stuff. Talk
but
to
you can only
people.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can only do that by asking the right questions. So the other thing is, what do I need to know? What is important? Like, what is before my value stream? What is downstream of my value stream? Understand what's going on there, and get this insight. So, and it could be related to how, like, you are an application team, how infrastructure is provisioned. Just understand how those teams work, because you can complain all the time, but you can also try to understand what's going on, and then use that information to take better decisions with the management team, and then you can grow, because then you could say, I understand what's going on in this organization. And that's where sometimes outside consultants, they know sometimes more of how the IT function operates, and that's why they're so valuable. But if you want to be valuable, you need to do that your own investigation internally, which is easy to do because you have access to all the information on SharePoint. You can talk to people, ask questions. So if I was a newcomer and young in the organization, you can do that. You'll be very successful. Oh,
Yeah, I think also the fact that you can do some tech talks and volunteer for presentations and stuff like that, I suppose, right?
absolutely.
Basically,
Yeah,
establish your thought leadership and so on.
yeah,
That kind of
that's,
stuff.
I think, good. Go present something, a case in yourself, because you learn by telling, right?
Correct, correct. You
Absolutely.
learn
That's
more by
important.
teaching. True.
Yeah. Yeah. And also you have to be careful, but because if you listen to talks, often you get an idea of, you get always nice talks, right? This is how good we are. So you have to read between the lines. Okay, they are good at that part, but we didn't see the bigger picture. So because often you think, oh, that's not feasible for us. This is too, but it is typically. You can implement it in a small way, because often it looks like, oh, that's so far away from where we are. But actually, it's not the case. They always maybe only show maybe one team that is actually very good in continuous delivery. It's not the whole enterprise. So you can do that also in small areas yourself. Yeah.
True, true. I think
You don't have to be a big organization, right? Um,
good, good. I think, and also the fact that you are able to do the storytelling around your ideas. You have a lot of ideas, but how do you storytell around it? So your Rabobank presentation was very engaging and very lively stuff, which is there on the one of the open group things. So how do you storytell around your offerings? I think that's a lot of this thing. And in one of your presentations, I think I remember you put a slide wherein there was a palindrome. You told the IT story like a palindrome. So you go the
yeah,
reverse,
correct.
you go the forward, and you go the reverse. So that was also quite very creative, actually. I don't know how you managed to do that. That looked like a real
Yeah, it's
master stroke.
palindrome inderdaad. Je took the, yeah. But I
Yeah.
think storytelling is important. And maybe that's a good way to start in most transformation. What are the key? Maybe it's just a digital journey. In this case, a DevOps journey. How are new teams onboarded? How do we develop new services? How do we do? And then along these storylines, investigate how things are currently done, how we would like to get them done. It's really about those journeys and stories indeed.
True, true.
And then linking back to what are the capabilities I need, and take IT4IT as a reference model for that. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So, is there any certification? Obviously, ID4ID is a good certification to have. So, is there anything else that you would suggest as a knowledge build up? Any books that people should read and so on? So, what do you think is something that people should be reading, or these are certifications that they should be having?
Yeah, so if you have an IT4IT certification, you have the bigger understanding of this, how I think everything is connected. I think DPBOK is a key one, digital body of knowledge, right? The digital product body of knowledge, because they bring together a lot of different concepts, lean, agile
Yeah,
development.
very true, very true.
So that's good. Then typically what's also still good is ITIL, right? Understand a bit what ITIL4 is doing. TOGAF, or more like enterprise architecture, to get an understanding of value streams, capability thinking, but also read DevOps books, right? You have that Gene Kim with books on DevOps. I think there's good materials there. Look at the Scaled Agile framework. And you don't need to be certified for all those things, right? You can just consume the materials a lot. The
Phoenix Project and those kind of books.
Phoenix Project, yeah. But I think it's important to be, it's like research, right? Collect data. IT4IT is typically nice, big picture overview. But you still need to research yourself, Scaled Agile, DevOps, ITIL, and monitor the market where things are going into. Because if you want to understand this bigger picture, vendors will come to you, and let's say you're in a company and they say, oh, now we can solve your problem. We got an AIOps platform and we do automated remediation, right? And you feel like, oh, that sounds great. But you also need to understand, well, actually, that is still maybe nice thing to do, but it's maybe something we need to experiment first, right? And it's not that common yet, and you still need a good data foundation, like your product and service topology. So that's why it's so important to get a good understanding of how everything is connected, because we know the CMDB has never been up to date, right? And we know how that comes. It's because we didn't understand how things are changing. So it's the whole value streams. And CMDB is just one component to get it right.
True. I actually think before we close, I'm just reminded of Charles Betts. He was saying that he started his career with designing a CMDB. And even after 20 years, now IT4IT's core focus is to build that one unified CMDB, which doesn't exist. It's all there in people's minds, in silos. So it's like a whole full circle that though we started off with very good intentions 20 years back, a couple of years later, we're still there, not having something in place. So I think that's what you have seemed to echo, that you started with your Fox Pro thing of trying to bridge the whole problem.
And of course there will never be one integrated CMDB, but it's a hybrid. It's like a federated model, I guess. And in ITIL, in the past, it was called a service knowledge management system, right? It's every encompassing data. But I think that's where you mentioned good things. It's not just IT data. It's like your contracts in Ariba. It's maybe your HR staff and skills profiles in Workday, because they are relevant as well. So it's more like, as long as we know where the data is, it doesn't have to be in a single repository. It is about where is the data mastered, and where, how do we connect the dots together? Because there will never be one integrated system, right? For managing.
True.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Rob. I think it was a very lively discussion that we had, and your energy is very palpable in the area. And I've seen people talk about this. It can be very drab if you don't connect the dots and explain it the way you are explaining it. So the energy is quite evident there, and we hope to see the IT4IT 3.0, which will meet the digital industry problems and take it to the whole new level. Thanks very much, and definitely I'll look forward to another session from you when we are done with that. So thank you. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I'll just stop the